Welcome to a special edition of So-and-So, brought to you by Bernina, Made to Create. I'm Meg Goodman, and we're visiting the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky during the 2022 Quilt Week festivities. This week, the museum is featuring some very special exhibits: Untamed Abstraction by Sheila Frampton Cooper, and new quilts from an old favorite, Shakespeare. It's the latter of these, which is an international contest organized by the Quilt Museum to challenge quilt makers to create an innovative quilt based on a specific traditional pattern. Winners of the contest traditionally include quilts from many different U.S. states and several other countries. Quilts are selected for their excellence in design and techniques, their innovation, and their contributions to an exhibit showing the wide range of designs and styles the selected traditional pattern can inspire. We begin our visit with Rachael Barr, Curator of the National Quilt Museum.
The National Quilt Museum is a museum that honors today's quilters, and that today's quilters can be anyone. And so we're here to celebrate the artwork of quilting. We are all over the globe. We really try to include quilting that is going to touch everyone, particularly the person who is not familiar with quilting. Our goal is to change minds. When people walk into the museum, they see art. It's fabric and thread, but it is art. And that's what we really focus on the magic of quilting, the storytelling of quilting, and the amazing artwork that it is.
Would you tell us a little bit about the history of the museum?
The museum was founded, of course, by Bill and Meredith Schrader. And, of course, we're so fortunate that they did, because they started collecting, as I understand it, they started collecting quilts and realized these are artists. We need a place to honor and to respect their work. And so this is how the National Quilt Museum became a museum, and was here in Paducah because the Schraders are from Paducah. We just celebrated 30 years last year, and I can't wait to see where our next 30 years takes us.
What does it take to curate an exhibit like this? Many people come in and look at this, but they don't know the behind-the-scenes work that goes on.
We start planning our exhibition schedules maybe 2 to 3 years in advance. And so we are working with artists, we're working with different organizations, quilting organizations, years in advance. And we start looking at what is out there, what are people talking about, who are the quilters that people want to see. And so we starting that early. And then it's a lot of kind of back and forth with artists. Artists are so thrilled to be able to have an exhibition here. So I really like to let them think about, okay, this is your time. You tell me what you're going to have in the exhibition. And then we work from there. And so then it's planning the layout, because all these walls that you see around me, they move. And we move them. Mm-hmm. So for me, I like to kind of brand each exhibition, so that it is a new experience. These quilts can stand on their own. They don't need me. What I try to do, though, is to add to the experience, to add to the visual beauty. And so I let the quilts then kind of tell me where we're going, what are we working on, and so that's kind of how.
Tell us about the contest this year and how you came up with the theme.
The New Quilts from an Old Favorite competition has been part of the National Quilt Museum for probably at least maybe 27 years. And we thought, well, we're going to take a little refresh. So we were off. Pandemic didn't help at that time, but we had planned to be off anyway as we kind of revamped, refreshed the program, because we wanted more and more quilters to see, okay, well, this is something I want to be a part of. So we talked to quilters, we talked to artists, we asked, what do you like, what don't you like about the competition? And decided that, okay, based on what we're hearing, here's what we're going to change. We're going to keep the fact that it is the old favorite of being the old block. but let the artist choose what block they want to use. Because the artists, they may like piecing, they may like applique, so we didn't want to dictate that. So we let the artisan choose that. But then the new part is, let's have a theme. So the exhibition, you'll see it's very cohesive. Everyone is following the same kind of idea. But the creativity, with, of course, quilters are known for, certainly, is just all over the place, which is so exciting. So our new is the theme of Shakespeare, and then our old is that the artist can choose their block. So when you look at them, the artist then kind of will tell you a little bit about why they chose what they did. There's a number of quilts. It's just an amazing exhibition.
This international contest really did challenge quilt makers to create innovative quilts. As Rachael mentioned, it is indeed an amazing exhibit. Let's start with Laura Pomes, who is a first-place winner.
I come from a background of theatrical costume design and art, and when I read about the contest, I thought that this was just the perfect time for me to jump into something like this. So I started doing research on all of Shakespeare's plays, and then I got out my big book of quilt blocks, and I tried to make some kind of a connection between the name of the play and the name of the block, and I came up with Twelfth Night Vision.
How long did it take you to build a quilt?
It took me every bit of 3 months to work on the piece because I was trying so many new techniques, and I wanted to kind of perfect them before I jumped into the final piece.
So, Laura, would you describe your quilt as we're looking at it right now so our listeners can see it through your words?
Well, I think that I basically tried to paint with fabrics. And I wanted to create almost a suggestion of a portrait of William Shakespeare. So everything is very linear. And the texture is created with all of the quilting that I did, and especially in the face, because when I used the night vision photography color palette, and then I was able to go back and stitch over that and try and match the threads to the colored pencil, I felt like that really gave the face a lot of interest and a lot of dimension.
There is a lot of depth in his eyes.
Yes, yeah. I was a little afraid when I first started to do that, but I had made 3 extra faces so that I could practice before I jumped onto the real deal. And each one of them turned out a little bit different, so I kind of chose what I liked the most about the other 3 that I had done. So, like I say, there was lots of experimenting going on, trying to find, something new and trying to make each section of this quilt, the quilting in each section, look different from one another. There are feathers all quilted in his collar because in those Elizabethan times, if you think about those big, frilly, lacy collars that they wore. And the doublet, I was so inspired by the heavy brocaded fabrics of the Elizabethan period and the doublets that they wore and the shape that their body took when they had on one of those doublets. And each one of these is an individual circle, fussy cut circle, and I embroidered in each one of the little buttons with a little bit of gold thread because I wanted to punch it up a little bit. I felt like he should have that little bit of jewelry on him. And this was the perfect answer to that. And then to stitch around each individual button so that they really stood out. And then I repeated that in the border so that this didn't look, his center here didn't look so like it was all alone. It needed a friend. So that was when I finished the outer edge with all the little fussy cut perfect circles.
And there's some sparkle.
There's some sparkle. A lot of the fabrics from the Renaissance period had a lot of, like a little gold thread running through them. And I was trying to do that with the use of the black and gold fabrics, and then with just the sheen of a polyester spun thread. And then I added the little beads in the center of the little feather circles to give it a little more sparkle.
So tell us about your journey from deciding to enter this contest to when you found out that you won.
Well, I started with, like I start every other quilt. I started with my fabrics. I researched a little bit of the Renaissance painters, and that's how I chose my color palette. And then I was able to choose all of my fabrics from there. And because I absolutely love scrap quilts, it felt like the perfect solution to putting together the Night Vision block. I could manipulate the block by the use of color. And so that's kind of where I started. And then I knew I wanted to make this into a portrait. So I printed off a picture of William Shakespeare, black and white, on my printer at home, and I pinned it in the middle of my design wall, and I started building the piece around that. And once I had gotten all of my blocks made, I wanted to try a new technique to color his face. So I printed the face I loved onto the fabric that you could run through your computer, an inkjet printer. And I wanted to connect the Night Vision, the name of Night Vision, the block. So I started to research night vision photography, and that was how I came upon the color palette that I wanted to use to color his face. And so I got his face all colored, and now I had it done. I had it all sewn together, and I still felt like he needed a little bit of dimension, and that's when I decided I could add the buttons to the front of his doublet. But every time I turned around, I was trying to always express some type of a Shakespearean theme. With the fabrics that I chose, I have fabric that has musical notes on it, and that represents the famous line from Twelfth Night, "If music be the food of love, play on." So I thought it was really important to include something like that. And then I also had found some fabric that had little feathers in it, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. Every time we see a picture of William Shakespeare, we see him sitting at a desk with a big feather pen. And so I kind of ran with the theme of the feather, and I tried to incorporate that all through the quilting on the quilt.
Describe for us the moment when you found out you had won.
Oh, I was in the car with my cousin, and I had put Rachael on speakerphone. And when she told me that I had won the first place, I was, and I couldn't even talk. I just was so choked up with emotion, because I had worked really hard and I really had no idea what was going to happen. And it took me a little while to kind of calm down, and Rachael just kind of took over, and she said, well, let me tell you a little bit, about what's going to happen. And, she went through that, and I just sat there quiet because I had tears in my eyes, and I really didn't know what to say. But it was just feels like such an honor to be a part of this exhibit at the museum.
Laura, you are now an award-winning quilter. What's your overall inspiration for your work?
Well, I think that I love to learn new things. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And I take a lot of photographs, and when we travel, I just love to always see new places, and I get inspired by, it can be a rug or, a tile wall or, anything like that. And I think when you're a quilter, you're just constantly looking for quilt patterns everywhere you go. So I feel like sometimes inspiration is just literally everywhere for us.
What's one thing people should know about you that they might not know?
Oh, probably that I absolutely love to sew. This quilt that I made was a joy to work on every single day. And I'm just a regular gal who loves to sit at her sewing machine, and I love, collecting my fabrics, and, that's about as exciting as it gets at my house.
Winning second place honors is Rachael Barr.
For me, my heart is equal parts gratitude and amazement. I look around at the rest of the quilts in this museum and in this gallery, and I think, oh, these are artists. This is true textile art. What am I doing here? but it has just been a thrill, and I can't really describe for you what it's like. Oftentimes as a creator, you're in your office, you're in your studio, and you're just sitting there sweating and swearing at your machine, and you don't know if what you're making is worth anything. And really, like here at the National Quilt Museum, they have made me feel so seen. And that, to me, that alone has been just the biggest gift.
So you get to stand here and watch the admirers, the patrons of the museum experience your work. What's that like?
Again, it's kind of just a remarkable experience to see people look at it and to smile. And because of the placement of the quilt, when they come around the corner to the gallery, they can see the image right away. And then I just see them look at it, and then I'll see them walk closer, and they'll walk closer. And I just see people, their noses are a centimeter away from it. And that's my response whenever I see a gripping work of art, and to think that other people are having that response for my work it's mind-boggling.
Tell us about your award-winning quilt.
Oh, thank you. I've been sewing for 32 years. When I was 7, my mother first taught me how to sew doing counted cross-stitch. And I have many, many memories of us, turning on PBS and sitting on our couch, and we would do cross-stitch together and watch TV. That experience and that knowledge for me really carried on into just so many other aspects of my creative life. When I was a little bit older, I got into bead weaving, which is also done on you can create patterns on a grid, just like with cross stitch. And then, when the internet came around, I realized that all of these images and all of these beautiful pictures I saw were just pixels on a grid, just like what I had. And so it's kind of oh, that makes sense to me. You can create a 3-dimensional shading with just these very simple 2-dimensional blocks. And another big influence for me, so my mother taught me cross-stitch, and then my father was actually a literature professor and the head of the drama department at my high school. So I grew up going to the theater. For my 10th birthday, we went and saw a production of Macbeth. When I was 16, I was accepted into the Stratford Shakespeare Academy, which is located in Stratford, Ontario, and I was cast as Lady Macbeth. And I did so this piece is called Come You Spirits, and it's a reference to Lady Macbeth's very creepy speech, very creepy monologue, where she calls on the spirits of the underworld to assist her in her ambitious goals to murder Duncan and take the throne.
How did you put this together, design it, pick the fabrics that's in it?
I only started quilting in the fall of 2020. I made my very first quilt. I started in September of 2020, and I finished the king-size quilt that is currently on my bed in October of 2020. Because the pandemic had me convinced that I was sleeping poorly because my blanket was bad.
That's good inspiration.
It couldn't have anything to do with, how horrible everything else was.
Sure.
It had to have been the blanket. And so I even, when I started doing this, because I'm still relatively new to quilting, I actually know very little still about fabrics. I'm still learning about them. And I don't have any kind of expensive design software. And so I actually opened up PowerPoint, and I used the shape-making tool, and I created a grid on a PowerPoint page, and I just started coloring in different boxes on PowerPoint.
That's brilliant.
And I was telling somebody that I'm a kindergarten teacher, and so my Pinterest page is all summertime bunny crafts for kids and skulls. So
there's a dichotomy there.
And I was like, I'm a multifaceted woman.
Yes.
And so I was looking at inspiration photos, and I started out thinking about going really simple with it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I really wanted to pay homage to the complexity that is Shakespeare. I have a PhD in literature, so this is something that I have studied and thought about and written, spilled mountains and mountains of ink over. And so I just started creating this skull, and at first it was very simple, and then it just became more and more complex until now there's almost 3,000 pieces in this little wall hanging, and now I've been talking so long I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. Okay. And your quilt is beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Audrey Kays is excited and honored to simply be featured in the museum.
Well, my whole goal in it and entering this was to have my quilt hang here in the museum and hang out with all these other wonderful quilts, and I feel well pleased that I've achieved my goal.
You got there.
All right.
I am just so thrilled. I have chills going up and down my body. And to have people come and actually say that the quilt is lovely and so creative, it's very inspirational to me to just continue on.
Another entrant, Gail Ryan, shares the same sentiment.
This is the only second time that I've entered a quilt contest, and it's hanging in a museum.
You've done well.
Thank you. And I figure anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. Just it gets your creative juices flowing when you enter a challenge, because you think, what can I do with this? It would be so wonderful. And then it's hanging in a museum. I mean, really, what more could you want?
The Shakespeare contest is only one of the featured exhibits. Another is Sheila Frampton Cooper, who is known for her free-flowing fiber art.
Ran into you and have an opportunity to get to know you and your work. You have a beautiful exhibit here. Tell us about it.
Yes, this is Untamed Abstraction, and that's kind of my theme, because I just like to be very free with my creative process, and I love abstract work. I'm not interested in really creating anything that exists realistically. I prefer to pull from the depths of my mind, and who knows what's going to come out. And that's the fun part for me, is not knowing, and to discover things about myself in my work. And I had the same approach as a painter many years ago when I used to paint, and I've really brought that into my quilt making. But it's much more challenging than being a painter.
How old were you when you first started to sew and think about quilting?
That was 2009, so how old was I then? I'm 57 now, so like whatever that was.
Not as a young
No, I had
child.
no interest. I'm probably the most unlikely quilter, at least to me. Well, I had no interest in it. I didn't. I was the type that was in the garage with my dad. I liked the smell of sawdust. I was working on my car, and I just didn't really like those types of things. I made a few halters in the 70s, but that was about it. That was it. Who didn't, right, at that time?
Right.
But I discovered in 2009, it was a day of service that had been designated in honor of Martin Luther King Day. And that was just before Obama's inauguration. So I put my zip code in, and I was looking to where am I going to go and volunteer today, or who needs something. And then Project Linus popped up, and they are an organization that makes quilts for babies and children in the hospital, or if there's been an emergency situation and children need quilts, Project Linus delivers them. So I went to just with the intention of just dropping off the fabric and leaving. And they happened to have a table set up for the kids that day, because families were coming and everything, and the table had squares of fabric back with freezer paper taped to the table with markers for the kids, but there was no kids there. So I sat down and stayed all day and designed, drew blocks, and that was it. And then after that, I was hooked. I sat at the table, I stayed all day long, and I just drew on the blocks. And at the end of the day, I had a good feeling. So I literally heard a little voice in my head that said, "Hey, you like to make stuff? This is a good cause. Why don't you come back and join these ladies?" And I said, "You know what? All right, I will." And next week I returned with some fabric that I'd picked up from Joann's, and the rest is history. I made 35 quilts that first year. That's how I taught myself to quilt. That's why I love piecing so much. That's my favorite technique, because that's what I was doing. And that's why I like to really push the limits of piecing. And I also don't use pins when I'm piecing, or my curves or anything. And I love the engineering and the challenge of it and all of that.
So I'd like you to pick one of these and let's go over to it. And would you describe it so our listeners can see it as you talk about it?
Now, Crystal Mare is a blue quilt, and there's some light blue, white, and a little warm neutral weaving through. It's very small scale, very, very small pieces. And the reason I chose blue is because it was inspired from my view from my studio in France. And I named it Crystal Mare because my son saw it, and that he said it looked like when the sun is hitting the water and they're rippling, it looks like crystals. And I said, yeah, it does. So that's why I chose this name. Now this, I wanted the idea of that it's lighter at the top. So there are lighter values of blue in the upper right-hand corner, and it starts to deepen as you go down. And at the bottom, it's darker. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, you look at the top, you see the light is moving on the water, but what's going on underneath the surface? What's happening under there? This is something I always thought of as I gazed out the window. So while I'm never trying to make any specific little creatures or anything, I feel like that's what this is all about, is that the other dimension of the vast seas and oceans and what's happening under there. And also I create a lot of works that have to do with the ocean. It's from an environmental standpoint, this is important to me. And this piece probably took about solid 6 months of piecing and an additional 3 months prior to that to finish it. So it's very, very small pieces.
You knew I was going to ask you how long it took.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody asks that.
Sure.
And that's a
This is
legitimate
beautiful.
question,
It is.
because when you see something you like, getting an idea, is that even feasible for me? How long would it take to do something like that? I understand why people want to know.
We happen to be in the right place at the right time. Mildred Sorrells, Hall of Fame quilter, is here visiting one of her quilts prominently displayed here in the museum.
Well, I had seen an antique quilt years ago when I was hand quilting, and it just blew my mind to think that somebody in 1856 could make a quilt with all the techniques that's in that quilt. And so I got permission from the the grandson that had it, and he let me I made all the patterns for it. I got some ideas from it. I took some pictures and was able to measure some of the things, so I knew kind of how it was supposed to be put together. And then they had done a reverse applique, regular applique, piecing, and it had so many techniques in it, and it was just heavily quilted. And so I got busy and I drew up all of the patterns, and I drew the flowers, and they were a little different around the border. They had two different sides that were different, but I just made one pattern for the whole sides because it was a lot of work, and I guess I was getting tired, and I wanted it to be a little different too. And then I made two patterns for the corners, one for two corners and one for the other two corners. And so then I started out making it, and I tried to use every technique that they had used. And so I did paper foundation piece, the New York Beauty part of the block, and then I appliqued it onto the block. And then the sashes, I appliqued the flowers together, and then they were all the vines and leaves were reverse appliqued. And so that's what I did, all those techniques. Then when I got it all together, I put it together, and I can't remember for sure. I think I used a polyester bat, a thinner bat. And so I hand quilted it in a 14-inch hoop that I'd bought from Walmart for $5. And I quilted it, all the feathers first, and I drew all those feather designs. I make my own stencils usually, and so I marked it for the feathers and quilted those, And then I went back, and the original was quilted diagonal lines, about 1/8 of an inch apart. So I marked it 1/4 of an inch apart and quilted those, and then I went back and quilted down between the middle. So it made the diagonal lines 1/4 inch apart, about 1/8 inch apart. And so that was kind of what I did. And then I sent that quilt all over the country, and it was down here, and it won first in mixed techniques. And then it was in 17 shows, and it won something in every show.
How long have you been quilting?
I started quilting in 81, and I think through those years I've tried every technique there is. I hand quilted for quite a few years, and then I finally got into machine quilting and on just a regular Bernina machine, and I started doing free motion machine quilting. And I won the Bernina Award here, and so it was a purchase award, and I got my quilt for the museum. And then later on in my life, I asked the museum if they would accept 3 of my quilts. And 2 of them were hand quilted, my best hand quilted ones. And the other one was a machine quilted one. They took the 2 hand quilted ones. And then I got into doing miniatures, and so I have 2 miniatures here too.
The excitement here is palpable. People don't just visit this place, they experience it.
So Jessica and Chrissy are here enjoying the National Quilt Museum, this amazing exhibit of winning quilts, and you're surrounded by a lot of beautiful art. Tell us about your reactions about what you're seeing today.
Disbelief first. Like, some of these are just so incredible. I can't even imagine starting something that they are creating. I mean, even having the time to do it, and it's inspiring. A lot of these I wouldn't even have thought to make the quilts that way. Like, you couldn't even quilt that way. So it's been interesting for sure.
Chrissy?
The inspiration, how they pull from the stories, and the different ways that everyone interprets these stories into their own quilts. And again, the amount of time and the effort and the techniques that they put into these. It's not just, piecing, it's appliquing, hand stitching, all the different delicate pieces that they put into it, buttons, the decorations. It's just amazing.
But it's been funny seeing the difference in what we've both picked up. Like, she's like, oh, this is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And then I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And she's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, there's something for everyone here. The community feel is amazing. Because at home, you're sitting by yourself and you're sewing and you're like, oh, I'm so alone. But like, now that everybody's back together and everybody's just so eager to share all the things that they learned in their little cooped up quarantine. So that sense of community has just exploded, I think. It's awesome.
The reason the Quilt Museum is so inspiring is because quilts from everyday people from all over the world are featured here. One of the ways people can submit their quilts to the museum is through the Block of the Month Club. Becky Glasby, Education Director at the museum, explains.
So Block of the Month Club, it's a program here at the National Quilt Museum that we offer for free. They can get to it on our website, quiltmuseum.org/Block of the Month, or under programs from the website. There's also a Facebook group, and we've got quilters, again, all around the world participating in this. We drop the pattern on the 1st of each month at noon Central Time. So it's a bit of a mystery for participants and people quilting along. We get guest designers who are collection artists here at the Quilt Museum or from our traveling exhibitions, just inspired by museum themes and programs here. And then they are creating a unique block for us and for the program. And it's great to see how all of these quilters all over the country, all around the world, interpret those instructions and that specific block. They might make it exactly the same as the way the instructions say from the artist. Some of them might use it as a jumping off point and really kind of put their own creative spin to the concept or alter a technique if that's something that maybe they don't like to do or can't do or aren't able to do at the moment, or just because they get inspired by the design or the detail. And then some who just use it really as that starting point and just add their own creative personality to the block and to the design. The exhibit here is our round 3 quilts, which were 2021 and coincided with the museum's 30th anniversary. And so it's really great to showcase. We've got 12 quilts in the exhibit, and we've juried them in from over 80 submissions from around the world as well. And so we've chosen blocks and quilts that showcase different types of settings, different elements or fabric choices, or variety of the blocks. Still staying pretty true to our instructions and kind of each month's details, but it really helps visitors and viewers and us to see here are 12 all together, and you can stand there and start picking out, here's the gemstone, here's the swirl, here's this thread, here's that, or I don't see the swirl that they did this because they made it into like a more labyrinth maze type block instead of just a straight spiral. Or they took some of our landscape-esque blocks that were from the year and kind of added their own adventure twists or ideas or locations to it that meant something to the artist itself. And so seeing all of these quilts together really kind of showcases the range of quilting and what quilters can do and how creative people can be, even when starting from those same instructions. They're choosing their own fabrics. They might be using a cohesive colorway. They might be going more mixed fabric scrappy. That's kind of my style, this kind of a coordinated, colorful, vibrant, scrappy kind of look, but all those fabrics go together, so I'm not using only one or two of a specific print. I like to kind of intermix different pieces and designs, and it's just a lot of fun to see how this program continues to grow, but also then get inspired by seeing these blocks and people going, oh, I want to try that technique, or they've never paper pieced, so they can learn how to do that in a small block format, and then really just have a lot of fun with their designs as well.
Becky is no stranger to the Block of the Month Club, as she has her own entry in this exhibit.
Becky, what's the name of this?
This one I called Cheers for 30 Years because it goes with our 30th anniversary at the museum. So It's kind of the museum version, but it's mine because I run the program and made it. So that's a lot of fun for me to test out blocks and put it all together.
Well, tell us about this. It's beautiful.
It's a lot of fun. We have blocks from Laura Waslowski, Christina Camelli, MJ Kinman, Audrey Easery, Ann Brower, Laura Lowen, Cassandra Beaver, Kathy Erickson, and then a couple that I designed in-house based off of the museum's front facade for one of the blocks. One of the beachy landscape that we have was inspired by our students' school block challenge last year, kind of taking ideas that popped up a lot through those blocks. So it's just kind of a great mix of techniques and designs. We did a Quilt As You Go method last year. That was kind of our encouragement for the group, and that was something I was interested in bringing in because I love the quilting aspect as well as the rest of the quilt making, but free motion quilting, or kind of getting those tips and having the designers add in how they would quilt the block or what their recommendations for designs would be, I thought was really a new skill that we'd never done before in the program, and a way to maybe get people a little more comfortable with trying different quilting techniques. We have a little bit of hand stitching, big stitch hand quilting through here. We have some hand embroidered little elements in there, a lot of machine quilting from straight lines and walking foot stitching to free motion and designs. And not everybody followed exactly, what the quilter recommended, or they put their own quilt designs into it. And so that is really great too, to see in each of the blocks how to adapt maybe different designs or details in the stitching, and just something I have a lot of fun with. And like I said, that's kind of vibrant, bright, colorful. I've got a lot of different bright colors, lots of different color threads in here as well. And so it's just really fun to be able to include mine in the exhibit and kind of have this here as well amongst all the other great pieces.
You can tell when you talk about it that this is special to you.
There really is a lot to experience and learn here. Most of all, that quilting is more than just a craft. It's an art form. It's rewarding, fulfilling, and anyone can do it.
What is really interesting is talking to the woman who won first place, and she talked about how she had multiple blocks and she would try her technique, and then she would I love that, or I don't love that, and then she would go to the quilt. And I think that's the biggest part that most of us forget about, is that it's practice. We can't just take on a piece and make it masterful. It's you got to practice it. You got to decide, I love that technique. Oh, I need to work on that a little bit more before I want to go apply that to my masterpiece.
Well, and it's forgetting the original image, because I know I'm bad about having an image in my head of what it's going to look like, and then when it goes askew, I'm like, oh, I've messed up. But that's not what it is. It changes and morphs, and that's when you create your masterpiece. It's not, you know what I mean? And a class I had the other day, she said, perfection isn't what makes the quilt, it's your personality you put in it. And that's what makes it an heirloom. That's what makes it a masterpiece. So I really like that a lot.
I used to teach a lot and travel around teaching and doing trunk shows. And I always told them, they would see what maybe I'd done, and they felt kind of, I would say, inferior. And I said, don't feel that way. I said, there's a place for quilters wherever they are, and just do what you want to do and what you like to do, because quilting is the most wonderful thing that has happened to us, or happened to me anyway, and my friends too here. It's just a thing where you get together, and I've been down here to Paducah for 35 years. I only missed one time coming to Paducah, and that was because my husband was ill and I didn't want to leave him. And so, anyway, it's been a wonderful thing.
I feel that even if you've never done improv, you can really benefit from it for several reasons. First of all, the opportunity to engineer, and just play, that's something that often as you get older, we just don't do. So there's a time and a place for a pattern. Then there's a time to do something different, to play, to relax, and not be concerned about the outcome. Don't judge it. Don't feel like you have to know what it's going to be before you start working on it. Set aside a little part of your practice to play and experiment. And this doesn't take away from tradition. This doesn't take away from any of that. It's an enhancement. And it's fun. And this type of work really, my ambidexterity has increased since I started piecing and quilting. I feel there are brain benefits to this, right? Both following directions and creating your own challenges to solve. So I really, really hope that if you never have, and you might have been intimidated, who cares? Improv can be at every level. It can be simple or complex. But just getting in and playing, whether it be with scraps or whatever, I feel is a wonderful thing to do.
Over 660 quilts now in our collection. And we are always interested in receiving exhibition proposals. We've had that information on our website. We're also interested, we are always acquiring new work. Mm-hmm. So if an artist thinks, do I dare try? Do I send something into the museum? Absolutely. And all that information is, again, on our website. Or if you've got questions about any of those processes, send the information to me, because we're here because our artists are here. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do.
Well, there you have it. Stories about people just like you. People for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life. It's a connection to something bigger. We owe a big thank you to the team and artists at the National Quilt Museum for giving us unprecedented access and a lot of conversation. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to info@soandsopodcast.com or just complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, rate and review it on your favorite platform, and visit our soandsopodcast.com website for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.